U.S. President Donald Trump has dropped his threat of imposing tariffs on the European Union for opposing his plans to acquire Greenland. On Truth Social, he posted that he met with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and together formed a framework for a future deal on Greenland and the entire Arctic region. He goes on to say that this solution, if consummated, will be a great one for the U.S. and all NATO nations. Trump didn't give more details on the framework, though, but he did deliver a special address at the ongoing World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, where the mood has been tense and grim due to his threat of tariffs and his push to wrest control of Greenland from Denmark. In his address, Trump ruled out using force to seize the Arctic territory.
Probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that. Okay? Now everyone's saying, oh, good. That's probably the biggest statement I made, because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force.
In his speech at the WEF, which was wide-ranging but often rambling for the better part of 70 minutes, Trump also chided Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney. Carney had delivered a rousing speech the day before on what he called the rupture in the world order. He stressed the end of the rules-based international order as we know it and urged middle power countries to act together to counter the rise of hard power. Carney was met with a rare standing ovation at WEF. But Trump, for one, was not so impressed, saying, quote-unquote, Canada lives because of the United States.
We're building the Golden Dome. That's going to, just by its very nature, going to be defending Canada. Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched your Prime Minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful.
During the Q&A after his speech, Trump also boasted about having close ties with Russian President Vladimir Putin, Chinese President Xi Jinping, for whom he had high praises.
So I've always had a very good relationship with President Xi and with President Putin. Talk about, the larger powers. But I've always had a very good relationship with President Xi of China. He's an incredible man. What he's done is amazing. He's highly respected by everybody.
Still at Davos, Bloomberg Media reports that European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde walked out of an exclusive high-level dinner after U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick started criticizing Europe. Lutnick was apparently belittling European companies for their lack of competitiveness compared to American firms. Separately, Lagarde, in an interview with China's CGTN, said countries should ready themselves for changes to the international order, which she says will be a long-term issue.
Whenever there is war in the world, and there is plenty of that at the moment, it is a brake on economic development. It is a brake on growth. And obviously it is affecting the life of people. The challenge to the international order, which is a longer-term issue which requires that we prepare ourselves and that maybe we change the way in which we operate, is a more medium and long-term issue.
All right, to talk more about this, let's now bring in geopolitical analyst Richard Heydarian, coming to us live from Oxford, is that right? In London.
Yes, hello.
You should have.
Wala pa yung British accent ko eh.
You should have crossed. You should have crossed over to Davos and see what all the fuss was about. I heard it's a different mood this year.
I'm still checking Greenland. Baka susugurin pa yung Greenland. I'm equidistant with Davos and Kangaroo-Lushwa, just to make sure, yeah.
Okay, but I'm sure you're monitoring the goings-on there. So in general, what did you think? I mean, obviously, Trump and his policies were front and center this time around, and there's a lot of people calling, saying it's the end of the rules-based international order as we know it.
Yeah, again, just to be clear, the Canadian Prime Minister was not playing around this. He was clear that the rules-based order was never perfect and it was very selectively applied. But now even a pretense to a selective application of a rules-based order is not there. To be honest, the Europeans already had an inkling of this during the Munich Security Conference speech by Vice President J.D. Vance the other year. when the American vice president basically chided and some would say belittled the Europeans. Now you have practically all top American officials doing that, including President Trump, who, as you showed earlier, seems to be very fond of strong men of superpower countries like China, like Russia, right? For that matter. In many ways, if you really follow the speeches by top European officials, whether it's Ursula von der Leyen, whether it's top commissioners of the European Union, whether it's the really strong interventions by the Finn president and other important leaders, it looks like we're seeing the beginnings of Europe's declaration of independence from the United States. So for the past few weeks, the Europeans made it absolutely clear that they're not gonna accommodate any kind of a Venezuela-style, regime change in Greenland, whereby the U.S. will just seamlessly and stealthily basically take over Greenland. They would count that as an invasion of a NATO territory, in effect, ipso facto, Denmark's territory, right? And the Greenland people, who I met also a few years ago, who also don't see themselves as part of Denmark, they're Inuit, they have a different culture, different flag, you need separate permit to get into Greenland. They also don't want to be part of the United States. They love the welfare system that the Danes and all of the benefits they can get from the Danish form of market economy. So the Europeans made it very clear, if the US makes an aggressive move there, that will be the end of not only NATO, but potentially the whole transatlantic alliance that has defined the post-war period in past 7 decades. And you saw from the speeches of Carney in Canada, but also top leaders like French President Macron, that Europe is recognizing that the US is no longer the reliable ally they look up to, and that Europe has to stand on its own. So one of the most interesting discussions we saw in Davos the other year was one of the commissioners, economy commissioners of EU, talking about Europe developing even its own financial system, its own credit card system. So this is relevant because as we speak, the US is imposing sanctions on the International Criminal Court, where Duterte is. So the Europeans are going to set up their own financial system. So in short, the Europeans are realizing they'll have to really stand up on their own. And for all the belittling of Europe, and it's true that Europe's military capabilities are nowhere close to where it should be, this is still the second largest economy in the world, minus the United Kingdom. And if you bring in the United Kingdom, the combined potential of Europe, financially, technologically, militarily, is not a small thing. But just to end on this point, what the Prime Minister of Canada also made it very clear is that the future of the world may not necessarily be Chinese-dominated or American-dominated. It could be based on a coalition of middle-sized, like-minded countries, from Canada to Australia, from Japan to South Korea, India, and Europe, and I would say also the Philippines potentially in that mix.
Okay, yes, that's the middle powers, quote unquote, Richard. But tell us here in the Philippines why we should care. I mean, we've been nonstop hearing this rules-based international order, especially when we discuss the West Philippine Sea and issues over there. Will this affect us?
Well, again, kaya nga gusto ko yung speech ni Prime Minister Carney is honest naman siya na may hypocrisy naman talaga pagdating sa application of the rules-based international order. He didn't name specific issues, pero alam naman natin iba yung response ng, for instance, European countries to what happened in Ukraine vis-a-vis what happened in Gaza, vis-a-vis what happened in Venezuela, and what could happen in Iran soon. So we had even one European Prime Minister, the Greek Prime Minister, saying, oh, we can discuss the legalities of the Maduro operation later on. So clearly that's hypocrisy. Absolutely that's hypocrisy. And Carney very politely and suavely mentioned that. And Prime Minister Carney of Canada is very familiar with Europe. He studied here in Oxford. He was the central banker, basically Treasury Secretary here in the UK. He has Irish background. He understands Europe. And even Canadians are talking about joining Europe or joining the European Union perhaps down the road if things go crazy with the United States. So basically the message here is that if we cannot rely on the US, it doesn't mean we're just going to be a prey to Russia, or it doesn't mean that China will dominate the world. No, if we put actually our resources together, we Europeans alone can be a global pole of power. And then if we work with others, and you saw also von der Leyen talking about India, talking about United Arab Emirates, talking about other major middle powers, then you can actually reshape the global order in ways that is more pluralistic and inclusive.
Okay, but Richard, what role did NATO play and how crucial was their role in reining in the position of the U.S.? And do smaller allies, do they really have the leverage to negotiate?
Yeah, actually, I didn't answer no. So obviously, para sa Pilipinas, mahalaga itong issue ng rules-based international orders because whether itong issue yung United Nations Convention Law of the Sea, yung ating arbitration case laban sa China, or whether ito yung International Criminal Court at saka holding Duterte era administrations accountable for EJ case, lahat ng mga issue na yan, umaasa tayo sa mga international courts, international law regimes, no? So, kung ikaw ay isang mas maliit na bansa at hindi ko maintindihan yung mga ibang MAGA Pinoy dyan na tuwan-tuwa dito sa Mach politic ni Trump, power politics ni Trump. Like, kung ikaw ay hindi superpower, and rule of jungle, basically, kung sinong superpower, what will stop China tomorrow from doing what Americans did to Maduro, from doing to a Filipino president they don't like? Now, obviously, US is way ahead of China militarily for now, but in 5 to 10 years from now, when China will be also a military superpower, not only economic superpower, what will stop them from saying, oh, if US can do that to Maduro or whoever else before, we can also do that to Taipei, to Manila, which is even more vulnerable, in my opinion, than Taipei. If ever we have a future president who's even more outspoken than BBM on the West Philippine Sea issues. So obviously, nasa interest po natin ang rules-based international order, but we cannot do it. We have to work with other mid-sized countries who have resources, who are also invested in rules-based international order, and Europeans literally host international bodies like ICJ, like ICC, like PCA, and so on and so forth. So yun ang issue ngayon. So I think in terms of principle, there's already recognition na tapos na yung Pax Americana as we know it. But the question right now is, okay, what are we going to build in its stead? And how are we going to move forward? And that's why this year, mahalaga yan, dahil tayong ASEAN chair, marami sa mga world leaders are going to come to Manila. Likely Trump and Xi Jinping will come to Manila, but also Macron, also top leaders from Europe, Ursula von der Leyen, among others. And there, I hope the Philippines opens this kind of serious discussion.
Yeah.
You know what's even interesting is that if you talk to top officials in the Trump administration, they'll also tell you, yeah, you guys have to pick up the tabs, right?
Yeah,
that we're sick and tired of the world police.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you, related to that, should we adjust our foreign policy to accommodate this new world order?
Or maybe the better question to ask would be, are we recalibrating fast enough? Because if it's true that we've entered the might is right era, then do you get the sense that the administration is shifting gears fast enough?
Oh, I think we already preempted this, diba? Just look at our current foreign secretary, Lazaro, who's known as being very adept in dealing with China. She was very much in charge of the China dossier when we had all of those problems in the West Philippine Sea. If you look at the language of President Marcos on Taiwan issues and South China Sea issue, he keeps on talking about diplomacy and conciliation. He reached out to President Xi Jinping last year on the sidelines of APEC personally to invite President Xi Jinping to the Philippines and vice versa, Philippines to the APEC summit in China. So as we speak, yes, I think our elites, our political elites, policymakers, and strategists are aware may limitasyon talaga yung reliability ng United States. But that doesn't mean we're going to dump our alliance with the U.S. No. U.S. is still valuable to the Philippines. We still need the U.S. to balance against the worst instincts of China. But it also means we have to work double time with other mid-sized countries like Japan, like Europe, among others, who also realize, like us, that you don't want to be under China's influence, but you cannot also fully rely on America. So I think here there's an opportunity for us to make that move. At sana yung mga presidentiables na nag-iisip na mag-succeed kay BBM as early as now already put their foreign policy teams together and really calibrate what we should do. The only good thing is we're not an immediate neighbor of any of these two superpowers, right? Even though China claims West Philippine Sea. But having said that, we have to seriously consider the possibility of a U.S. that is much more inert and a China which is much more aggressive, or at least similar to what the U.S. has been doing to the rest of the world in the past half a decade.
Right. Yeah, well, he's hoping the people that matter are listening. But we're going to have to leave that there. Thank you so much for your insights today. And stay warm over there. Richard Heydarian, geopolitical analyst.